Rancher lived alone for years, until a frozen mother Bigfoot knocked on his door. For 15 winters, Elias Ward spoke to no one but the wind, until one night the wind knocked back. Through the blizzard he saw her, a frozen mother clutching her child. Not a monster, but a plea for mercy. He could have turned her away, but something in her eyes, something human, stopped him. By the fire they sat in silence. The child breathed again, and the old rancher felt warmth he thought he'd lost forever. That night Mercy wore fur and carried her child through the storm. Some still say beasts roam these woods, but Elias Ward knew the truth. Some souls, no matter their shape, just want a home. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Montana, 1889. The storm had teeth that night, wind slicing through the valley, snow roaring like ghosts across the ridge. In a lonely cabin at the edge of the pines, Elias Ward sat beside the fire, the glow painting his scarred face in flickering gold. For years he'd spoken to no one but his horse and the wind. Silence had become his only companion. Then came the knock, slow, heavy, desperate. Elias froze. The door shuddered again, a sound too human to be the storm. He grabbed his lantern, heart pounding, and unlatched the lock. The door swung open, snow burst inward. And there she stood, a massive figure, fur glazed with frost breath, shallow arms wrapped around a shivering child. Not a beast, a mother on the edge of death, begging for mercy. Part 1. The Shelter. The storm howled outside, clawing at the cabin walls like a wild thing. Elias Ward stood frozen by the open door, lantern trembling in his hand. Snow whirled in around his boots, and the figure before him barely moved, the great shape of a mother hunched beneath the weight of her child. He could have shut the door, ended it there. No one would have blamed him. But something in her eyes, that quiet, desperate light, refused to let him. With a deep breath, Elias stepped back. "Come in," he said softly, though his voice cracked with fear. The Bigfoot mother hesitated, then lowered her head. She stepped forward, each movement heavy and careful, her massive shoulders brushing the doorframe. The cold followed her in a swirl of white, the scent of pine and frost, until Elias pushed the door shut and sealed the night outside. Inside, the cabin felt impossibly small. The creature filled the room, steam rising from her fur as the warmth began to thaw the ice. Snow clung to the floor in wet clumps. Elias tossed more wood into the fire. The flames leapt higher, painting the walls in orange light. The Bigfoot mother crouched beside the hearth, her arms wrapped tightly around the small bundle she carried. The child whimpered softly, its breath shallow, its fur thin and matted with ice. Elias knelt a few feet away, careful not to move too quickly. He reached for a kettle, filled it with snow, and set it over the fire. The storm outside roared again, wind pressing against the windows. Inside, only the crackle of fire answered. When the water steamed, Elias poured it into a tin bowl and slid it across the floor. The creature's gaze followed his hands, watchful, uncertain. She didn't touch it. Instead, she turned the bowl gently toward her child. The little one stirred, reaching weakly. With trembling fingers far too human, the mother lifted the bowl and held it to the child's mouth. The young one drank small gulps between shivers. Elias watched in silence. When the bowl was empty, the mother set it aside. She never took a sip herself. Something shifted inside him. The fear that had filled his chest since the door first shook faded. In its place grew something else, something warmer. He saw it then clear as day in the flicker of the firelight. Not a beast, not a legend, but a mother exhausted, starving, and still giving everything she had left to keep her child alive. Elias rose, quietly reached for an old wool blanket and laid it near the hearth. The mother's golden eyes followed him. He nodded once slowly, as if to say, "It's all right now." The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin the fire burned steady, a small, stubborn light against the cold. And for the first time in years, Elias Ward wasn't alone. Part 2. The Longest Night. The storm never stopped. All through the night, the wind screamed through the trees, hurling snow against the cabin walls like the fists of a ghost. Inside the fire was the only light, a small golden circle of warmth holding back the endless dark. Elias Ward sat near the hearth, his rifle propped against the wall beside him. He hadn't moved much in hours. His eyes traced the slow rise and fall of the Bigfoot mother's breath. She sat curled by the fire, her body hunched protectively around the small one. Steam rose off her fur where the heat met the frost. The child slept now, its soft breathing almost lost in the sound of the storm. Every so often it stirred, clutching at its mother's arm. The mother's huge hand would tighten in response, an instinct so gentle it caught Elias off guard each time. He reached for the kettle, poured the last of the hot water into a tin cup, and took a slow sip. The taste was faintly metallic, but warm. He looked across the fire at them, the two figures that had entered his life, like ghosts from an old frontier tale. He still didn't understand what they were, where they came from, or how they'd found him. But tonight, that didn't seem to matter. When the wood burned low, Elias rose stiffly, joints creaking in protest. He fetched more logs from the stack by the wall. The Bigfoot mother's eyes followed his every move, gold flickering in the firelight. He kept his gestures slow, deliberate, the way he might calm a wild horse. Easy now, he muttered out of habit, voice low and steady, just keeping the fire alive. He crouched by the stove, adding another piece of pine. Sparks rose bright and brief before vanishing into smoke. The creature didn't move, but when he turned away, he caught something subtle, the barest nod of her head. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it froze him where he stood. A sign. A beginning. Hours crawled by. The fire cracked. The storm raged. Elias moved through his cabin quietly, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace they'd found. He sliced strips of salted venison and set them near the edge of the fire to warm. The smell filled the room, smoky and rich. The Bigfoot mother's nostrils flared, but she didn't reach for the food. Her eyes darted toward her child, then back to Elias. He took one piece, chewed it thoughtfully, then placed another near her. He didn't push it closer, didn't make a sound. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, the mother stretched out her hand and pulled it toward her child. The little one woke, blinking groggily. She tore a small bit of meat, chewed, then curled back into her mother's arms. Only after that did the mother eat the remainder, one careful bite at a time. Elias exhaled softly, an ache blooming in his chest. He'd seen ranch hands treat their cattle with less tenderness. Later, when the woodpile dwindled, he put on his coat and opened the back door. The wind bit his face, instantly sharp as glass. His hoarse whisper whinnied from the stable, restless but alive. "Easy, boy," Elias called, brushing snow from his coat. He filled the trough with water, then scattered a few handfuls of oats. The horse nuzzled his shoulder in thanks. From the cabin window, he caught sight of movement, the Bigfoot mother standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by firelight. She watched him through the snow, still and silent. Elias gave a small nod toward her, not quite a greeting, but an acknowledgement. After a pause, she returned the gesture. It was the first bridge of trust between them, a fragile thread spun in the heart of the storm. When he returned inside, the air felt warmer. The fire glowed steady, reflecting in the mother's golden eyes. She sat upright now, the child asleep in her arms. Elias took off his coat, hanging it by the door. He lowered himself into the chair, feeling the weight of years settle over him. For a long while, neither of them moved. He found himself staring at her face, the deep lines beneath her eyes, the exhaustion carved into every motion. It wasn't so different from the faces he'd seen in men who'd lost everything. He remembered his wife Hannah gone to fever, and their boy Thomas just 6 when the sickness took him. He'd buried them on a hill near the cottonwoods long before the snow came. He hadn't spoken their names out loud in years. Now, watching this creature hold her child, he felt that same ache return, raw, human, unbearable. He leaned forward, stoking the fire, voice a whisper. "Don't worry, girl. You'll make it through." The mother stirred at the sound, eyes glancing toward him, not afraid this time. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the fire hummed. The air was thick with the smell of pine and smoke and something fragile peace. Elias leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time in 15 winters, the cabin didn't feel empty. The silence between them wasn't loneliness anymore. It was understanding. As the flames flickered low, the Bigfoot mother drew her child closer, wrapping both arms around it. And across the fire, Elias watched her and thought of a truth he'd forgotten long ago. Sometimes the only thing stronger than fear is care. Part 3. When the fire softened. The second night came quieter than the first. The storm had grown tired of itself, drifting away toward the mountains. Only a few soft flakes still fell, turning the forest outside into a frozen dream. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low and gentle, no longer a battle against the cold, just a steady breathing light. Elias Ward sat near it, shoulders hunched, eyes heavy but awake. Across from him, the Bigfoot mother rested against the wall, her massive form casting long shadows on the timber. The child slept soundly, curled in the crook of her arm. The air between them was still but not empty. It carried the faint rhythm of something human, the quiet comfort of presence. Elias poured himself a little water, then stared into the flames. The logs cracked softly. Smoke coiled upward, lazy and warm. He didn't mean to speak, but the words came anyway, rough and low. "I once had a boy," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, old, dry, unused. He was 6 when the fever took him, and his mother too. He stopped there, eyes fixed on the fire. He hadn't said those words aloud in over a decade. The Bigfoot mother didn't move, but her golden eyes lifted to him. There was no understanding of language, but something deeper passed between them. The awareness of loss shared, and silent. Elias continued in a whisper. "I built this cabin for them. Thought maybe if I stayed, I'd hear their voices again in the wind." He gave a short, humorless laugh. Turns out the wind doesn't talk back. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of wood and the faint hiss of melting frost. The child stirred, then a soft, sleepy sound. One small hand slipped free from the blanket, reaching out toward the table where Elias's tin cup sat half full. The fingers brushed it lightly, tipping it just enough to make the metal ring against the wood. Elias startled, then chuckled an unsteady sound that turned into something between a laugh and a sob. He wiped a hand across his face. "Well now. Easy there, little one." The mother's gaze shifted toward him, alert at first, then calm, when she saw no threat. The child's wide, dark eyes blinked open, curious. Elias slid the cup closer, smiling faintly. "Go on," he murmured, his tone as soft as he used to speak to his boy. The small creature reached again, fingertips brushing the rim. It looked at him with a kind of wonder, then back at its mother. She nodded once, a slow, almost human motion, and the child sipped. Elias's throat tightened. He turned away, pretending to tend the fire, but his hands shook. Minutes passed in silence, but something had changed. The space between them no longer felt like a cage built by fear. It was a shared hearth, 2 worlds meeting in the same flicker of light. The mother shifted slightly, laying her child down on a folded blanket. She watched Elias, her eyes steady, almost gentle. In that gaze he saw not a creature of myth, but something painfully familiar. Exhaustion, devotion, love. He spoke again, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You're just doing what any mother would." The fire popped softly in response, a spark rising and fading into the dark. The mother blinked slowly, her breathing steady, her body no longer tensed in defense. For the first time, Elias saw her at rest, not as a monster, not as a shadow, but as a soul burdened by survival. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines. The storm was truly dying now. Elias leaned back, letting the warmth seep into his bones. He remembered his boy's laughter echoing through this cabin, once the sound of boots thumping across the wooden floor, the smell of stew and smoke and life. For years he'd thought those memories were punishment, now they felt like a gift. Across the room, the Bigfoot mother adjusted the blanket around her child. The firelight danced across her fur, making her seem almost golden. For a fleeting moment, Elias imagined she smiled. He smiled back quietly, the weight in his chest lifting just a little. The night deepened. The fire softened, and in that small, fragile warmth, 3 lost souls, 1 man, 1 mother, 1 child, found a silence that wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that healed. Part 4. The farewell in the snow morning came slow and silver. The storm had finally broken, leaving the world draped in a clean, untouched silence. Light poured through the cabin window, soft and golden, laying itself across the floor like a blessing. Elias Ward stirred awake to the faint sound of movement. The fire had burned low in the hearth, glowing like the last heartbeat of the long night. He blinked the sleep from his eyes and saw her standing there. The Bigfoot mother was by the door, her great shoulders dusted in melting frost. In her arms, the child stirred softly, blinking up at the morning sun. The snow beyond the door gleamed white as bone. Elias rose slowly, boots creaking against the wood. "You're leaving," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. The creature didn't answer, but the stillness in her body told him everything. She bent down, her movements slow, deliberate. From within the furs that wrapped her, she pulled a small object, a piece of wood, worn smooth and carved with the shape of a hand. The lines were rough, but clear, the symbol simple and powerful. She placed it on the floor before the door. Then she looked at him. The air between them held no sound, only the whisper of snow melting on the window pane, the soft exhale of the dying fire. Elias stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. He stared at the carving. His throat tightened. "A thank you," he murmured. "Or maybe, goodbye." The mother's eyes glowed amber in the soft light. For a heartbeat, he thought she understood him. Maybe she did. The child shifted in her arms, making a small, curious sound, almost a sigh. Elias smiled faintly, his weathered face softening. "You've got her strength," he said quietly, nodding toward the mother. "You'll make it." He reached out slowly, not to touch, but to offer the gesture a human farewell. The mother tilted her head slightly, watching him. Then, to his quiet astonishment, she bowed at once, a motion heavy with grace. She turned, then facing the open doorway. The morning sun spilled across her, lighting her fur with gold. The child clung tighter to her chest, tiny fingers curling into the thick strands. Elias whispered, "You'll find your way home." The Bigfoot paused in the doorway. Snow swirled lightly around her feet, glittering in the new light. She turned her head one last time, eyes meeting his. Gone was the fear of their first night, gone the exhaustion and pain. What lingered now was something softer, older, almost human. For that brief moment, Elias felt the world stop. The wind held its breath. The sun seemed to listen. Then she stepped forward into the snow. The child's face turned toward him, small and bright against the white, before disappearing into the glare of the morning. The trees swallowed them, quiet, graceful, as if the forest itself had opened its arms to take them home. Elias stood there long after they were gone. The doorway framed nothing now but the endless white of winter. His breath misted in the cold air. He glanced down at the carving on the floor, the small wooden hand. Its grooves were deep, deliberate. He picked it up, turning it over in his palm. The shape was rough, but warm, the mark of something real. He closed his fingers around it, holding it to his chest. For a man who'd spent 15 winters alone, the cabin suddenly felt full. He stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The light was brighter now, dazzling, reflecting off the valley like glass. Elias followed the footprints that wound through the snow, massive tracks, each fading a little more as the sun climbed higher. He traced them to the edge of the pines where the forest began again. There they vanished, completely swallowed by the shadows of the trees. He stood there a long while, eyes scanning the white horizon. There was no movement, no sound but the wind, and yet he didn't feel alone. Something inside him had changed. The ache that had lived in his chest for years, the hollow echo of loss, was no longer sharp. It was still there, but softer now, shaped by understanding. He looked down at the small carving in his hand, then toward the forest. "Thank you," he said softly. The wind shifted through the pines, low, slow, almost like a reply. When he returned to the cabin, He placed the carving on the mantel above the fire. The flames caught it, gently casting its shadow long against the wall. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down in his chair, and watched the light creep across the room. The storm was gone. The air was still. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It simply felt peaceful. Part 5. The night the West remembered. The night settled quiet over the valley. The last of the snow drifted down in lazy spirals, silver under the pale moonlight. The storm had long passed, leaving the world washed clean, silent, vast, and still. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low but steady, throwing a soft glow across the wooden walls. Elias Ward sat in his old chair by the hearth, a wool blanket draped around his shoulders. The smell of pine smoke and warm ash filled the air, the kind of scent that clung to memory. He reached for the small wooden carving on the mantel, the hand the Bigfoot mother had left behind. Its edges were smooth now, polished by the touch of his thumb over the hours he'd spent holding it. He turned it in his fingers, the flames flickering against the curves of the wood. Then he smiled, faint, wistful, but real. The world outside was dark but peaceful. Somewhere beyond the trees, wolves howled at the rising moon, their cries stretching thin across the valley. The sound didn't frighten him anymore. It reminded him that life still moved out there, wild and unbroken. Elias leaned forward, pulling the small leather-bound journal closer. The cover was cracked and worn, the edges darkened from years of use. He opened it to a blank page and dipped his pen into the ink pot, the nib scratching softly as he began to write. That night I met Bigfoot, and she taught me that even in the darkest places, mercy still lives. He paused, staring at the words. The firelight shimmered across the ink, still wet. He thought of the mother, her golden eyes, the silent strength in her every movement, the gentleness with which she carried her child. He thought of the way she'd looked back at him before vanishing into the snow. No fear, no anger, just quiet gratitude. For years, Elias had believed the West was only about survival men against nature, beasts against men, a world too harsh for softness. But he knew better now. Even the wild, he murmured, has its kindness. He leaned back in his chair, watching the fire breathe and settle. For the first time in 15 winters, he didn't feel the ache of loneliness. He felt something else instead, connection. It wasn't about words. It never had been. It was about small mercies shared between souls who had no reason to trust each other and did anyway. A soft knock came at the window, gentle, rhythmic. Elias turned, half expecting the wind, but it was just a branch swaying in the breeze, brushing against the glass. He smiled at the thought. "You'd better stay out there," he said softly, almost as if she could hear him. "This world needs you more than it needs me." He stood joints stiff and moved to the window. The valley stretched far and white beneath the moon. The pines glimmered under frost. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement, a dark shape far beyond the tree line, but it could have been a trick of the light. Still, it made him smile. He went back to the fire and poured himself a small cup of coffee. The warmth seeped into his hands. Every so often the fire popped, and the cabin breathed like a living thing. He looked around at the worn furniture, the old saddle by the wall, the half-empty shelves. The same walls that once felt like a prison now felt like home again. Funny, he thought. Nothing had changed, except him. He wrote again in the journal, the words flowing softer now. In this harsh land, only love and kindness can keep a man's heart warm. The West remembers not its storms, but the hearts that endured them. He set down his pen and closed the book, resting it beside the fire. Outside, the wind had calmed completely. Snow drifted past the window like feathers falling from the sky. Elias leaned back in his chair, the blanket pulling tighter around his shoulders. His eyes grew heavy as the warmth from the hearth wrapped around him. He thought of the child's small hands reaching for the cup, dark eyes blinking in curiosity. He thought of the mother, proud, strong, and fierce, carrying mercy through the blizzard. And he thought of his own son, long gone, whose laughter once filled this same cabin. Maybe in some way the storm had brought them all together, man, beast, memory, and hope. A single log cracked in the fire, sending a brief shower of sparks into the air. Elias smiled faintly, murmuring to no one. Guess I wasn't meant to be alone after all. He reached once more for the small wooden carving, holding it gently in his weathered palm. It was still warm from the fire. He whispered, "Thank you, girl, for reminding me what mercy looks like." His voice faded into the quiet hum of the night. The moon climbed higher. The fire dimmed to embers, the room bathed in soft orange glow. Elias's breathing slowed, his hand still resting on the carving. Outside, the valley slept under its blanket of snow, and somewhere beyond the trees, a shadow moved slow, steady, alive. The wind carried no howl, no threat, only peace. Leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. Subscribe and ring the bell. More stories from the Wild West await you. The fire crackled once more, gentle and steady, and as the night deepened, Elias Ward, the man who lived alone for years, finally drifted into sleep, his heart warm and his story forever written into the quiet soul of the West.